Few people today know that the ancient world once had its own version of hidden knowledge, and that some of the greatest minds in history, Plato, Pythagoras, even modern thinkers like Carl Jung, were deeply influenced by it. The Orphic Hymns, a collection of mysterious invocations written more than 2,000 years ago, whispered in secret temples, sung by initiates seeking to understand what the soul truly is. It's strange, isn't it, that a set of ancient poems could carry ideas so modern, so alive, that even neuroscientists today echo them without realizing it. Jung called Orphism a mirror of the human psyche, and Joseph Campbell saw in Orpheus the eternal myth of the artist descending into darkness to bring back the light. When we open the Orphic Hymns, we're not just reading, we're stepping into a world that feels strangely familiar, one that speaks to something we've lost. Think of it. More than 87 hymns dedicated to the gods, yet not to worship them in fear, but to understand them as forces within us. Zeus was not just a ruler of heaven, he was the principle of order, the mind that governs chaos. Persephone wasn't just the queen of the dead, she was the power of renewal, the descent we all must take to find our own rebirth. These hymns weren't meant for the masses. They were tools for inner transformation, a kind of ancient self-therapy before psychology even existed. Imagine living in a world where every sound, every vibration, every word was sacred. The Orphics believed that creation itself was born from sound, from the voice of a cosmic being called Phanes, whose song shattered the silence of eternity. Science now tells us something eerily similar, that the universe might have begun with a vibration, a cosmic hum that still resonates through space. What the Orphics intuited through myth, physicists now measure through frequency. And that connection between myth and science, between spirit and matter, is where this story begins. But who was Orpheus? To most of us, he's the tragic poet who tried to rescue his beloved Eurydice from the underworld. Yet in these hymns, he's more than a character. He's a bridge between worlds, a shaman, a prophet, a guide. The Greeks said his music could move stones and tame wild beasts, that even Hades himself wept at his song. Some scholars believe that Orpheus was never one man at all, but a lineage, a tradition of initiates preserving ancient truths under one sacred name. His lyre, his descent into the underworld, his death and rebirth, all metaphors for what happens when the soul seeks truth. We descend, we lose, we grieve, we rise again. If you've ever felt that quiet pull inside you, that desire to understand where you come from, what your purpose is, why life feels cyclical, you've already touched the spirit of Orphism. The Orphic hymns begin with an invocation to Hecate and end with one to Mnemosyne, the goddess of memory. Between them lies a journey of remembrance, the soul remembering what it has forgotten, the human remembering that it was once divine. Even today, this idea resonates. When we meditate, when we silence the noise of the world to listen inward, we're repeating an Orphic act, invoking the inner voice of the gods. Archaeologists discovered Orphic fragments inscribed on gold tablets, buried beside the dead. Each tablet carried instructions for the soul's passage after death. One of them reads, "I am a child of earth and starry heaven, but my race is of heaven alone." These weren't metaphors for believers, they were declarations of spiritual identity. The Orphics believed that the soul was trapped in a cycle of reincarnation until purified by knowledge, by truth, by music. And when you think of it, isn't that what so many of us still search for today? Freedom from confusion, from ignorance, from the endless repetition of the same mistakes. The hymns were composed in a rhythmical tone, meant to be sung at twilight, when the barrier between worlds thinned. Each god invoked represented not a being to be feared, but a part of yourself to be understood. To sing to Dionysus was to awaken ecstasy. To sing to Apollo was to invite clarity. These weren't external forces, they were states of consciousness. What the Orphics discovered, and what modern psychology now confirms, is that we are a symphony of energies. That transformation doesn't come from outside, but from aligning our inner frequencies. What's fascinating is how the Orphic worldview influenced everything that came after. From the mystery schools of Egypt and Eleusis to early Christianity. Even the idea of resurrection, of dying and being reborn into light, can be traced back to Orphic symbolism. The Gospel of John begins with, "In the beginning was the Word," echoing the Orphic creation myth of the divine voice. The more we study these hymns, the more we realize that Orphism was not a lost religion. It was the foundation of all Western spirituality. And perhaps that's why it still calls to us now. Because deep down we feel the same longing the Orphics felt, to reconnect with something eternal, something beyond the chaos of everyday life. Their hymns offer not just mythology, but a map, a way to remember who we are beneath the noise. When you read them, you don't just learn about gods, you begin to recognize them inside yourself. But the question remains, how were these hymns actually used? What secret rituals, what hidden practices brought them to life in the dim light of ancient temples? And why did their initiates guard them so fiercely that only fragments survived the ages? We're about to open that door, into the rituals, the symbols, and the initiations that turned poetry into transcendence. Before moving on to the next installment, Orpheus, the musician who spoke to the dead, tell me in the comments what your favorite book or manuscript is. Thank you. They say that when Orpheus played his lyre, even the stones wept. But behind the legend of music so divine it could move the dead lies a story of transformation, a story that speaks directly to us. Because like Orpheus, we've all descended into darkness for someone or something we loved. We've all tried to bring light back from places that seemed unreachable. And that is exactly what the myth of Orpheus represents, the eternal struggle of the human soul to find meaning beyond loss. In the Orphic hymns, Orpheus isn't just a poet or a lover. He is the initiate who dares to see what lies beyond the veil. The book describes him as the first of men to purify through music, one who used sound not for entertainment, but as sacred medicine. Modern researchers now recognize that music can alter brainwave patterns, induce trance, and even heal trauma stored in the body. What Orpheus practiced more than 2,000 years ago was an early form of vibrational therapy, a science of the soul that modern psychology and sound healing are only beginning to rediscover. The hymns tell us that when Orpheus descended into the underworld to retrieve Eurydice, he didn't just go to save her. He went to face the mystery of death itself. That descent was a metaphor for initiation. Every initiate in Orphism had to symbolically enter the underworld, to confront the shadow, the hidden aspects of the self. Carl Jung wrote that Orpheus descends to meet what is repressed, to awaken the soul sleeping in darkness. What Jung described in psychoanalysis, Orpheus lived through myth. According to ancient commentators, the songs Orpheus sang below the earth were not of sorrow but of remembrance. He reminded the spirits of who they truly were, fragments of divine light trapped in mortal forgetfulness. And this is the essence of the Orphic vision, remembrance. The soul doesn't learn, it remembers. Every truth you discover isn't something new. It's something ancient waking up within you. In one of the surviving fragments, Orpheus sings, "From chaos I was born, and to light I return." Think about that line for a second. Isn't that what every human journey feels like? We're born into confusion, and we spend our lives seeking clarity. The hymns echo this same rhythm: descent, transformation, return. It's the pattern of every story, every healing, every awakening. And this pattern isn't just symbolic, it's psychological. Neuroscience now confirms that our brains reorganize themselves through cycles of descent and integration. We break down to rebuild, we lose to grow. But what made Orpheus different from other heroes was his refusal to use violence or conquest. In an age of warriors and kings, his power came from harmony. He believed that truth could be sung into being, that the right vibration could unlock the deepest gates of the soul. Some scholars, like Walter Burkert, describe the Orphic hymns as manuals of transformation, texts to guide the initiate through altered states of consciousness, leading to purification and ultimate liberation. The descent of Orpheus was not a tragedy, it was a map for transcendence. The hymns themselves give hints of these rites. Before each invocation, the initiate would purify themselves through fasting, silence, and incense. Then they would chant verses aligned with the cosmic order, hymns to the night, to the stars, to the boundless ether. Each sound corresponded to a planetary force, each rhythm a step closer to the divine. When Orpheus sang to Hades, he wasn't begging for mercy. He was aligning his frequency with the vibration of death itself until even the underworld responded in harmony. You might wonder, why did he look back? Why did he lose Eurydice at the very moment of escape? Ancient texts suggest that it wasn't weakness or doubt. It was revelation. To look back was to break the illusion, to see that love itself is part of the eternal cycle. Nothing is truly lost. Everything transforms. Eurydice was never gone. She became part of the song, part of the eternal harmony Orpheus carried back to the living. When we face grief, heartbreak, or loss, we live that same myth. We go down, we seek, we look back, and we return changed. That's why the story still touches us, because we are all Orpheus. Each of us carries a lyre, a voice capable of transforming pain into meaning. The hymns remind us that even in our darkest nights, something inside us still sings. In fact, ancient initiates called Orpheus the teacher of the soul. They believed his descent revealed the path all souls must take after death, a passage through purification, remembrance, and eventual reunification with the divine. And that's why the hymns were recited not just by the living, but for the dead. They were spiritual codes guiding the consciousness beyond the material world. But here lies a deeper mystery. If Orpheus used sound to bridge the worlds, what exactly were these sounds? Were they just words? Or did they carry hidden vibrations, specific frequencies designed to awaken dormant parts of the mind? Could the hymns themselves be ancient keys to consciousness? That's the question that leads us deeper into the heart of this mystery, because what follows next reveals that the hymns weren't written as simple poems. They were encrypted messages from a forgotten science. When scholars first studied the Orphic hymns, they thought they had uncovered a simple collection of ancient prayers. But the deeper they looked, the stranger it became. These hymns weren't written like traditional Greek poetry. They were mathematical, coded, symmetrical. Each verse was aligned with the stars, each rhythm designed to alter the state of the listener. To read them is to touch something alive, something that moves beneath language, and maybe that's why they still haunt us. Because in their structure, their music, and their silence, they hide a secret about creation itself. Modern researchers such as M.L. West and Thomas Taylor noticed that the Orphic verses follow patterns based on harmonic ratios, the same ratios that define musical scales and planetary motion. Think about that. More than 2 millennia before physics could describe resonance, these ancient poets were composing in tune with the vibration of the cosmos. They believed that words, when aligned with sound, could open portals in consciousness. What we now call frequency or quantum resonance, they called divine music, harmonia cosmou. And this wasn't abstract. Each hymn in the book was meant to be sung aloud, with a precise tone and rhythm. Ancient inscriptions even include notes about incense, myrrh for the solar hymns, storax for lunar invocations. The goal was to create a sacred environment where body, mind, and sound aligned. The initiate didn't just read the words, they became the vibration. That's why Orphism was known as the path of the sound-born. The hymns weren't stories, they were formulas, spiritual algorithms disguised as poetry. If this sounds esoteric, consider this. Neuroscientists today have found that chanting rhythmic mantras can synchronize the brain's hemispheres and alter neurochemistry in measurable ways. The Orphics already knew this. They used repetition and rhythm to dissolve the boundary between the human and the divine. Every sound invoked a god, not as an external entity, but as an inner archetype. A hymn to Apollo activated clarity. A hymn to Dionysus awakened ecstatic surrender. The words weren't symbolic, they were triggers. Each syllable a key. But where did this knowledge come from? Ancient tradition claimed that the hymns were revealed to Orpheus by the Muses after his descent into the underworld. He returned not just with the memory of Eurydice, but with the secret language of creation, a music that could speak to gods and mortals alike. Later, Orphic schools preserved these teachings through oral transmission, passing them only to initiates who had undergone purification. The version we know today, 87 hymns compiled in Asia Minor around the 2nd century CE, is likely the echo of a much older source. Some scholars even believe the Orphic tradition carries remnants of Egyptian and Babylonian star wisdom encoded in Greek form. When you look closely at the text, something fascinating emerges. Many hymns begin with cosmic deities, night, heaven, chaos, and gradually descend toward more earthly forces, earth, seasons, rivers, and finally the inner gods of the psyche. It's a descent in reverse, a roadmap for creation, unfolding from pure spirit into matter. You could say the book itself is a mirror of the universe, the divine breathing itself into existence through language. The ancients didn't separate poetry from cosmology. To sing was to participate in creation. To mispronounce was to disrupt harmony. Let's take the hymn to Night, for example. It begins, "Night, mother of gods and men, thou source of all, thou silent guardian of dreams." That's not just poetic imagery. Night for the Orphics was the primal matrix, the womb of all potential. From her came light, then Phanes, the shining god who sang the world into being. You can feel the rhythm. It moves like breath, like waves. The repetition of sound mimics expansion and contraction, mirroring the birth of the cosmos. The hymn isn't describing creation. It is creation, performed through sound. This is why reading the Orphic hymns casually misses their true essence. They were written for ritual, for resonance. The initiate would chant the lines repeatedly, matching their breathing to the pulse of the verse, until their perception began to shift. Boundaries blurred, time dissolved, and something extraordinary happened. They began to hear the silence beneath the sound. That silence, they said, was the true voice of the divine. You and I might think of this as mystical metaphor, but maybe it's something more. Consider how certain frequencies can shatter glass, or how sound waves can form patterns in sand and water. Cymatics. The Orphics believed the same principle governed consciousness. The right sound could reorganize chaos into order, could tune the soul. In that sense, the hymns were not just prayers, they were instruments for inner engineering, and perhaps that's why they endured. Long after temples fell and empires vanished, the hymns continued to circulate among mystics, alchemists, and philosophers. Renaissance thinkers like Marsilio Ficino used them for astral invocations, believing they could attract planetary influences. Even modern occult traditions, from theosophy to Jungian analysis, trace elements of their structure back to Orphic origins. It's as if these words refuse to die, vibrating through history, waiting for those ready to listen again. So if these hymns are coded poetry, designed to reshape consciousness, the next question is inevitable. What exactly were they trying to awaken within us? What was the inner map they were drawing? And how did it redefine what the gods truly were? We're about to step inside that revelation, into the heart of Orphic theology, where gods aren't distant beings, but reflections of our own divine anatomy. When you first encounter the Pantheon of the Orphic hymns, it feels like entering a vast cosmic theater. Every god, every goddess, every spirit has a role. Yet none of them are simply divine beings living above us. The deeper you go, the more you realize that the gods of Orphism are mirrors of the human soul. They're not out there, they're in here. They are psychological, spiritual, and energetic dimensions of what it means to be alive. And this is what makes the Orphic hymns so revolutionary. They didn't teach people to worship the gods, they taught them to become them. Carl Jung once wrote that the gods have become diseases, meaning that when humanity stopped recognizing the sacred within, divine archetypes turned into inner conflicts. The Orphics seemed to know this long before modern psychology. They sang hymns not to ask for favors, but to awaken dormant forces within themselves. When they invoked Zeus, they weren't speaking to a thunder god in the clouds. They were calling upon the principle of divine order, the mind that brings harmony to chaos. To invoke Zeus was to stabilize thought, to find the center of power within confusion. Then there was Dionysus, one of the most complex deities in the Orphic system. The hymns describe him as the twice-born, the one who dies and rises again. To the Orphics, Dionysus symbolized the indestructible spark of life, the divine madness that breaks boundaries and frees the soul from form. In psychological terms, he represented emotional release, the ecstatic dissolution of the ego. When worshippers sang his hymns, they weren't losing control. They were restoring balance by allowing life to flow again. The ancients believed that suppression led to sickness of the soul, and that ecstatic music could heal by releasing what was trapped. Today, trauma therapy and somatic psychology confirm what Orphic ritual already knew: the body keeps the score, and liberation requires expression. Persephone, the daughter of Demeter, held another essential key. In the hymns, she is mistress of the dark gates, guide of souls. Her descent into the underworld and return to the light wasn't just a myth of seasons. It was a metaphor for the soul's own cycles of death and renewal. The Orphics saw her as the divine feminine power that teaches us to embrace endings, to transform pain into wisdom. They believed that every descent, every grief, every loss, hides a sacred instruction. To follow Persephone was to learn how to die before dying, to let go of what no longer serves, and thus to be reborn. In our modern world of constant movement and distraction, that's still a lesson few have mastered. But perhaps the most profound Orphic revelation was that all these gods, Zeus, Dionysus, Persephone, Apollo, Hermes, and the rest, were not separate beings competing for attention. They were emanations of a single divine source. The Orphics called it Phanes, the Shining One. Phanes was the primordial light that burst from the cosmic egg, bringing order out of chaos. Every god, every soul, every atom was a reflection of that light in different forms. Phanes represented consciousness itself, the awareness through which all existence perceives itself. When you understand that, the Orphic Pantheon stops being mythology and becomes psychology. Every part of you, your strength, your desire, your intuition, your reason, is a god in disguise. What's striking is how close this ancient view is to ideas we now find in depth psychology and quantum theory. Jung spoke of archetypes, universal patterns of consciousness shaping our inner world. Physicists speak of energy fields and entanglement, suggesting that separation is an illusion. The Orphics already lived this truth. They didn't just believe in unity, they sang it into being. The hymns were bridges between the microcosm and the macrocosm, between your heartbeat and the pulse of the universe. And each hymn carried an implicit invitation to recognize the divine within your own experience. The hymn to Helios, for example, praises the sun as the all-seeing eye that awakens every life. But it's not just celestial worship, it's a metaphor for consciousness. The inner sun is awareness itself, the light that reveals truth. When the initiates sang this hymn, they were aligning with clarity, burning away ignorance. The hymn to the moon spoke of reflection, emotion, and cycles, a call to embrace change rather than resist it. Together, these polarities formed the sacred marriage of opposites, a core Orphic principle echoed later in alchemy and mysticism: unity through balance. We can still apply this wisdom today, when we honor our rational side without rejecting our intuition. When we accept joy without denying grief, we are living the Orphic path. Every internal conflict, between desire and discipline, control and surrender, chaos and order, becomes an opportunity for harmony. The gods are not fighting within us, they are waiting to be reconciled. The hymns teach us to stop fragmenting ourselves and start conducting our inner symphony. And that's the hidden genius of Orphism. It offers not a religion of obedience, but a psychology of awakening. Instead of kneeling before gods, the Orphic initiate rises to meet them, as equals, as co-creators of reality. The gods were models for human evolution, blueprints for self-realization. To sing their names was to remember your divine origin. But if these hymns were blueprints for awakening, they also implied a responsibility: purification. To contact the divine within meant cleansing what blocked it. The next step in the Orphic path demanded discipline, silence, and deep transformation. Because before you can sing with the gods, you must first tune the instrument of your soul. Every ancient tradition speaks of purification, of cleansing the body, the mind, and the spirit before approaching the divine. But in the Orphic hymns, purification wasn't a ritual of fear or punishment. It was liberation, a remembering, a process through which the soul reclaimed its original harmony. The Orphics believed that every human carried within them a fragment of Dionysus, the god torn apart and reborn, a divine spark scattered in the world of matter. Our suffering, they said, came from forgetting what we truly are. To purify the soul was to gather those fragments and become whole again. Orphism taught that the soul's imprisonment in the body was not a curse, but an opportunity. Plato, deeply influenced by Orphic thought, wrote in the Phaedo that philosophy itself was a preparation for death, meaning the purification of the soul from the illusions of the senses. The Orphics took this literally. Through fasting, music, chanting, and moral discipline, they sought to detach from the lower impulses that bound them to endless cycles of rebirth. And here's what's fascinating. They didn't separate moral purity from energetic purity. Every thought, every emotion, every word was vibration. Anger, greed, envy, these weren't sins, they were dissonances. When your inner music fell out of tune, you forgot your true frequency. The hymns were designed to retune the soul. In the hymn to Mnemosyne, goddess of memory, the Orphic initiate prays, "Grant me remembrance, O Queen of Thought divine, that I may recall what once was mine." That single line reveals the core of Orphic purification. It's not about becoming something new, but remembering what you've always been. We cleanse not to erase, but to remember, to return to clarity. Modern psychology calls this integration, the process of facing our shadow, reconciling repressed parts of ourselves. The Orphics did it through sacred song. They sang their way back to wholeness. They believed that purification had three dimensions. First, the physical, fasting, bathing, avoiding bloodshed and certain foods that were thought to disturb inner balance. Second, the mental, guarding thoughts, speaking truth, studying the hymns to align with cosmic order. And third, the spiritual, participating in nocturnal rituals, chanting invocations to harmonize with divine energies. Together, these formed what they called catharsis, the cleansing of the soul's mirror so it could reflect divine light once again. But what's striking is how modern this sounds when you strip away the symbols. Today, mindfulness, meditation, and sound therapy all point toward the same principle, purification through awareness. Neuroscience confirms that rhythmic chanting can slow brainwaves into theta states, the same frequencies associated with healing and insight. Breathwork detoxifies not just the body, but the emotional field. The Orphics, without modern science, were already practicing these methods. They knew that sound, breath, and rhythm could reprogram the mind, that the soul could be tuned like an instrument. The hymn to the sea captures this beautifully. "Hear me, O sea, whose waves both purify and restore." The sea symbolized emotional cleansing, the washing away of psychic residue. In Orphic ritual, water was sacred because it mirrored consciousness itself, fluid, reflective, ever-changing. To purify was to allow movement again, to stop resisting flow. We can all relate to that. How often do we cling to emotions, replaying old stories until they define us? The Orphic message is simple. Let it move, let it wash through you, and it will leave you lighter, clearer, freer. In some versions of Orphic initiation, the final stage of purification took place in darkness. The initiate entered a cave or enclosed chamber, symbolizing the descent into the inner underworld. There, in silence, they recited hymns to Hades and Persephone, gods of transformation. The goal wasn't to escape death, but to make peace with it. They faced the fear of dissolution and discovered that what dies is never the essence, only the form. This confrontation with death, symbolic or real, was the ultimate purification. It stripped away everything false, and when they emerged, the initiate was twice born like Dionysus, ready to live consciously. One ancient tablet found in Thurii, southern Italy, gives us the words recited by Orphic initiates after death. "I am a child of earth and starry heaven, but my race is of heaven alone." This wasn't poetry, it was identity, a statement of purified being. Imagine repeating that with conviction, feeling in every cell that your essence is celestial. This was the goal of Orphic purification, to awaken the memory of origin. And yet Orphism didn't stop there. Purification was only the threshold. Once the soul was cleansed, it became capable of receiving higher knowledge, of perceiving the hidden architecture of the universe itself. The hymns hinted that every purified soul could interact with cosmic energy directly, not through priests or intermediaries, but through vibration, through sound, through resonance. This is where Orphism begins to merge with what we now call science, energy work, and metaphysics. The purified soul, they said, could feel the living pulse of the cosmos, could commune with the frequencies that sustain creation. Modern physics calls it the quantum field. The Orphics called it the music of fanes. So purification wasn't the end, it was preparation. Preparation for a deeper revelation that would unite mysticism and energy, poetry and vibration, spirit and science. Because once you have purified the soul, you begin to hear what the universe has been singing all along. Imagine this. Thousands of years before Einstein, before Tesla, before modern physics even had a language for energy, the Orphics already taught that everything in existence vibrates. Every rock, every star, every heartbeat, all part of one living symphony. To them, sound wasn't a metaphor, it was the substance of reality itself. The Orphic hymns were not only sacred poetry, but scientific instruments, tools for tuning consciousness to the cosmic frequency. When modern scientists describe the universe as a field of vibrations, they are unknowingly echoing an Orphic truth sung in the temples of ancient Greece. Tesla once said, "If you want to find the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration." That sentence could have come directly from the hymns. In Orphism, the gods were frequencies, archetypal vibrations of creation. Phanes was pure light frequency. Dionysus, the rhythm of ecstatic life. Persephone, the pulse of rebirth. The Orphics believed that by chanting the right words in the right rhythm, you could literally harmonize your soul with these cosmic currents. They called it henosis, union through resonance. And this wasn't superstition. It was an early understanding of what we now call entrainment, the phenomenon where one vibrating system naturally synchronizes with another. In neuroscience, we know that when people chant or listen to rhythmic music, their brain waves begin to align. Beta waves slow to alpha, alpha to theta, producing deep relaxation, clarity, even transcendence. Ancient initiates experienced this not as a lab experiment but as a sacred return to source. The sound didn't just change the brain, it opened a doorway. They said the soul could travel through vibration, through what they called the golden thread of sound that connects heaven and earth. Some modern researchers have explored this parallel. In the Orphic hymns, there's a recurring reference to chains of harmony, a concept that later inspired Pythagoras, who claimed that the planets themselves produced music. The musica universalis. Today, physicists describe gravitational waves rippling through space-time, faint but measurable harmonics of the cosmos. The Orphics were right all along. Reality hums, it sings, and we, whether we know it or not, are part of that song. But what made the hymns truly extraordinary was how they encoded this truth in language itself. Each syllable, each poetic rhythm carried a numerical value, a vibration correlated to celestial geometry. The Orphics saw no separation between math, music, and spirit. The same ratios that defined the orbit of planets defined the intervals of their chants. To them, the universe wasn't written in equations, it was sung. All things, says one fragment, move according to the voice of the One. That line, hidden among the hymns, might be one of the oldest articulations of what quantum physicists now call the unified field. And what's even more fascinating is how this science of vibration was also a psychology of energy. The Orphics believed that each human emotion vibrated at a different frequency. Anger was dense, heavy, binding. Compassion was light, expansive, liberating. Through conscious sound, through chanting or harmonic singing, one could transmute emotional energy back into harmony. That's why Orphic rituals often included music, dance, and collective chanting. When the group sang together, something happened. Individuals dissolved into a shared rhythm, boundaries blurred, and for a brief moment, unity was not a concept, but a felt experience. We might call that flow state today. Neuroscientists find that in such states, brain regions synchronize, the sense of self dissolves, and creativity expands. For the Orphics, that was communion with the divine. When the boundaries of the I dissolved into vibration, what remained was the eternal, the God within the sound. Modern physics continues to approach this mystery from another angle. String theory proposes that everything, matter, energy, space, time, arises from vibrating strings. Change the vibration, change the reality. The Orphic hymns hinted at the same law. By altering your frequency through sound, breath, and intention, you alter your consciousness and therefore your world. The universe, they said, sings through those who remember how to listen. But this wasn't just abstract cosmology. The hymns offered practical methods. The initiate would recite certain verses facing east at dawn to align with solar energy, others at night to harmonize with lunar cycles. They used incense not as superstition, but as frequency enhancers, each scent carrying its own vibration. They combined rhythm, fragrance, sound, and silence to create what we might now call a vibrational ecosystem. In that sacred space, transformation happened naturally. The mind grew still, the heart opened, the soul remembered. Perhaps what the Orphics were teaching, what modern spirituality is still rediscovering, is that vibration is consciousness in motion. Every thought we think, every word we speak radiates energy into the collective field. The hymns remind us that we are both instrument and player, both wave and observer. When our personal frequency is disharmonious, the world mirrors it. When we tune ourselves, and through truth, love, music, awareness, the external world shifts with us. That's why Orphic wisdom feels so relevant now. In a world of noise, chaos, and endless distraction, we've forgotten how to listen. Yet deep down, we crave harmony. Not perfection, but resonance. The Orphic path doesn't demand belief. It invites experience. It asks us to feel the pulse beneath appearances, to sense the music that never stopped playing. And as we step closer to the final understanding that awakening isn't about escaping the world, but rediscovering it as divine, one question begins to rise. If vibration is the bridge between mortal and God, what happens when we finally remember the song? Because in the final act of Orphism, that's exactly what we must do. Awaken through Orpheus and return to the source of all sound. Before the last part, take a moment to subscribe and let me know if this video taught you anything new. Thank you, let's continue. There's a point in every spiritual journey where all the questions fall silent, where theories, rituals, and philosophies dissolve, and what remains is pure awareness, simple, luminous, and infinite. That is where the Orphic hymns ultimately lead us, not to the worship of gods, but to the realization that the divine we've been calling to has always been calling from within. And that's the paradox the Orphics understood better than anyone. To seek is to remember what was never lost. The final hymns in the Orphic collection speak not to the outer gods, but to the inner fire, the spark of Phanes, the first light. From thee all nature springs, the text says, and to thee returns again. This cycle, birth, death, rebirth, return, is not just cosmic, it's personal. We live it every day in our thoughts, our emotions, our struggles. Every time we fall into darkness and rise again, we're enacting the myth of Orpheus. His descent wasn't a story of failure, it was a story of awakening. Because to descend is to face truth, and to face truth is to rise in consciousness. When we strip away the symbolism, Orpheus becomes a mirror. He represents every soul that dares to look beyond illusion. His lyre, his voice, his music, they are the tools of transformation we all possess: awareness, expression, and love. In the hymns, sound is creation, memory is redemption, and love is the force that binds the universe together. Orpheus embodies all three. He teaches us that healing doesn't come from escaping pain, but from turning it into song. That's why his music moved stones, calmed beasts, softened the hearts of gods. It was not his melody, but his sincerity, the resonance of a soul in harmony with truth. In modern terms, you could say Orpheus was the first to understand the psychology of awakening. He recognized that the mind itself creates the underworld, the realm of fears, shadows, and regrets, and that the only way out is through awareness. Every time we face our fears without running, we descend like Orpheus. Every time we bring compassion to what we once rejected, we bring Eurydice, our lost light, back toward the surface. And though we may look back and lose her again, the memory of that light remains within us. The Orphics didn't mourn the loss, they celebrated the cycle, because every descent deepens the song. In the closing hymns, the tone changes. The language becomes quieter, more direct, as if the voice speaking is no longer human but cosmic. The hymn to Mnemosyne, the goddess of memory, serves as the final key. Mother of thought divine, remind us of our birth in light, restore our sacred sight. This is not poetry, it's invocation. The initiate, having purified the body and harmonized the soul, now seeks remembrance of their origin. Mnemosyne is not just memory of the past, she is the memory of who we truly are beyond time. When that memory returns, awakening happens. You and I might call it consciousness. The Orphics called it the anamnesis of the divine. In that state, all distinctions vanish. Life and death, sound and silence, self and universe merge into one eternal vibration. The hymns describe this moment as the union of the singer and the song. In other words, the end of separation. When Orpheus sang, he wasn't performing, he was dissolving. His voice didn't carry outward, it expanded inward until there was no Orpheus left, only the music. Modern mystics, from Meister Eckhart to Krishnamurti, have said the same thing in their own words, that enlightenment is not becoming more but becoming less. Less of the illusion, more of the essence. The Orphics anticipated this by thousands of years. Their goal was not salvation in another world, but realization in this one. The divine, they said, is not in heaven or in temples, but in consciousness itself, the space through which all experience flows. And perhaps that's why Orphism vanished as an organized religion, but survived as a hidden current through Western thought. In Plato's dialogues, in the mystery schools in Renaissance philosophy, even in the quiet hum of meditation today. Its outer form disappeared, but its essence remained, like a frequency too subtle for words, yet felt by every soul that listens deeply. We can see traces of it everywhere, in the idea that life is cyclical, that love transcends death, that sound can heal, that knowledge lies within. The Orphic hymns were never meant to convert, they were meant to awaken, to remind us that the divine is not something we must earn, but something we must remember. Every time you pause, breathe, and listen to the silence beneath your thoughts, you're touching that same sacred rhythm the Orphics once sang to. You're participating in the eternal music of being. And so the story comes full circle. The voice that once sang creation into being now sings through you. The gods you once sought now move in your breath, your heart, your awareness. Orpheus, the eternal musician, has never left. He is the sound of awakening itself. Because in the end, the greatest mystery of the Orphic hymns is not that they reveal the gods, it's that they reveal you. The divine instrument, the echo of the first light, the memory of the eternal song that never stopped playing. And as you listen, as you breathe, as you remember, you realize that you've been home all along. The video is coming to an end, but there are many more videos available on the channel. You should check them out. See you soon, and thanks for watching.